We are back. I am your host, Ricky Brands. This is the Ripple Effect Podcast, and I am very excited about today's show. We get to talk about the cult that I'm constantly talking about, the ketogenic diet. I'm kidding. I'm only calling it a cult because I talk about it so much, and sometimes I feel like I'm trying to get people to join me in this cult, but really the reason why I'm constantly talking about it is because I know that we've been lied to about the way we should be eating, and we've been lied to about what is healthy and what isn't healthy, and so many of us have health issues, and could it improve their wellness and their quality of life if they just did a little research and realized that we've been sold some propaganda when it comes down to sugars and carbs and fats and what's good and what's not good and dietary cholesterol and all these complicated things that a lot of times can be overwhelming. And I think sometimes it being confusing is beneficial to the food industry. It's beneficial to the health industry. It's beneficial to the pharmaceutical industry, because people just give up and then they just eat what tastes good because they don't want to deal with all the headaches of doing the research. So we're doing a whole show on the ketogenic diet, about an hour and a half, with Dr. Dominic D'Agostino. He's an awesome guy, super fun to talk to, so knowledgeable. He's a scientist, researcher, professor. He's been on the Tim Ferriss show. He's been on the Dr. Rhonda Patrick show. He's done research for the military on the ketogenic diet. He's just such a ball of knowledge. And I'll put all the links in our show notes on our YouTube channel. You can find all the links to his website, his Twitter page, and all that stuff. And you can just look him up. He's done tons of interviews, very knowledgeable. So enjoy the show. As you guys know, I've done the ketogenic diet for quite a bit. I've had huge benefits in regards to my inflammation, my joint pain going away, my suppression of appetite, my ability to have cognitive function, even though sometimes on the show you probably second guess my cognitive function because sometimes I fuck up talking. But just imagine if I wasn't on a ketogenic diet, how much worse I would mess up when I'm talking and trying to gather a sentence sometimes. But joking aside, it's very beneficial, and I hope you guys enjoy the show. It's all the information you need, so I won't get too much into it on this intro. Remember, if you want to support the show, you can tweet it, share it, do all that stuff on social media, but you can also go on our Patreon page, which you can also find in the show notes on our YouTube channel, and support us on Patreon. You can get the Theory 6 Music Project, which is all the music you hear in the beginning and in the middle of this show, which is available everywhere where there's digital downloads, and all that money goes to supporting the show. But like I said, if you don't have money, you can share it, tweet it, do that stuff on social media, and that's more than enough, and really that's more than appreciated if you just do that. And also we'll hopefully be doing some more Fights with Friends soon, which is my live show I do for the UFC events, and it's a summer, so it's hard to get people and schedule people for the show and for Fights with Friends because everybody's so busy. People want to enjoy the weather, and if you live in New England, then you definitely want to try to enjoy the summer while it's still here. So and remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook. I am now on Instagram, and just like everything else, those links will be on or in the show notes on our YouTube channel. Just search the Ripple Effect Podcast, and you'll find it. And I'm sure, or if you're listening to this on whatever podcast app you're listening to, rate us on that. So thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. I'm a huge fan of the ketogenic diet. I've had people like CJ Hunt on, who did the Perfect Human Diet, and I'm a huge fan of Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf and all these people who've really, and yourself, who've completely made me rethink what nutrition is and how we should be eating, and basically turn a lot of what was conventional and kind of standard thinking of eating every 3 hours and 1 gram of protein for every pound you weigh if you're lifting weights and all that stuff, kind of made me rethink all that. And people like yourself, I'm a huge fan of, because you're scientific. It's not just somebody like myself who doesn't have a science background and isn't teaching at a university giving people this information, but it's somebody who really can break down into detail how it works, what happens in your body and the benefits and all that stuff. So it's really beneficial to have voices like yourself kind of getting this information out there. Similar to you, I kind of was born on a farm. My family's from Portugal. I was born on a farm, kind of ate a lot of potatoes, and I mean, I did have access to free range chickens and stuff like that, and some I guess more organic like foods, because we're eating things that are raised and grown on the farm and stuff like that. But we definitely didn't have an understanding of the difference between 1 calorie versus another calorie. We kind of looked at diet like everything was just kind of a calorie, and you're basically just trying to eat to keep your energy levels up, to maintain, to just kind of keep anger or getting hangry. So similar. Exactly. So how do you, from your background, for people who aren't familiar with your background, how did you get into, because I've seen pictures of you. You're a pretty jacked dude. I mean, you obviously were in, or probably still currently into weightlifting and stuff like that. And how did you get into diet and nutrition, and eventually down this road that got you into researching the ketogenic diet? But what's your background? How did you get into, was it just the exercising and maybe being an athlete or being into weightlifting that got you intrigued with the whole field in the first place?
Yeah, going way back, because I think, our past kind of influences what we do later on, is, I was really sort of a follower of like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all his movies in the mid to late 80s and in the 90s. Of course, wanted to be like him. My brother was really into working out. He played football. He was like super strong. I could bench like 4 plates, and he only weighed like 180, 190.
Wow.
So I was always trying to catch him. And for football, I would say that was probably the prime motivator, that I was relatively thin, like maybe 150-ish, going into like training for football. And I think that's when I really started doing the basic compound movements instead of things like curls and whatnot. And then my body responded real fast. So, when you respond to a training stimulus, you get more motivated because you see the results and the gains, and then you reach a plateau and you realize, well, what do I have to do to kind of get bigger and stronger and faster? So nutrition was the thing that I really focused my efforts on, and I probably got really scientific about it in my senior year in high school, and it influenced my decision to study nutrition science in undergrad. And I went on to Rutgers University and studied nutrition and then biological sciences. And during that time in college, you can spend a lot of time just, all I remember doing really is, studying and lifting and eating a lot. And I kind of grew in college a lot, and my strength grew, and I got increasingly interested in that. But I think my real passion is kind of steered towards nutrition, but also neuroscience, and maybe like nutritional neuroscience, which is kind of what I do today. I did my Ph.D. in physiology and neuroscience, and my Ph.D. was really focused on how the brain controls our physiology, our cardiorespiratory control, and as it relates to extreme environments. So I studied hypoxia environment, and then later on in my my fellowship work, I was looking at I was funded by the Office of Navy Research to study more or less extreme environments and what happens to the body and the brain during extreme environments, and how to develop and test what we call countermeasures or mitigation strategies to enhance the body's physiological, mental performance, and most importantly, safety in extreme environments. And the thing that I really focus on is oxygen toxicity seizures. And now we're doing more of like exercise studies and motor performance testing. And that led me down the path of looking into drug research. But I got really interested in dietary research, because the ketogenic diet was kind of serving 2 purposes. It had some maybe performance applications that are still being studied, but the thing that was very firm in the literature was the anti-convulsant and neuroprotective effects of the ketogenic diet. And that was something, of utmost importance to the program manager and sort of the science behind what I was, doing and developing. So it was really the work that was funded by the Office of Navy Research as part of the Department of Defense that funded the development of technologies that allow us to even study this, which are various environmental chambers, what we call hyperbaric chambers, and some go hypobaric. And we can look at down to the level of, nanoscopically, look at things in the mitochondria, look at things on the cell membrane, and all the way to chambers that can do whole animal studies. And then, now we're, doing chamber work in human studies. And last week I was on the NASA NEMO mission, where I lived in a hyperbaric habitat and did lots of studies on myself, taking blood samples, saliva, hormone analysis, living in saturation environment with astronauts. So and I stayed in a state of nutritional ketosis and documented it with various ketogenic formulas and whatnot. So that's probably more than you asked for, but
that's
kind of the research in a nutshell, how it evolved.
Yeah, because similar to yourself, I mean, I wasn't really. I'm Portuguese, so I started off playing soccer, then got into other sports, and then now I still play basketball today. And but I was always into weightlifting, and same thing, big Arnold fan. Ronnie Coleman. Lee Priest, all the, just loved all those guys. And just, it was like this idea of trying to create the perfect body, this Greek mythology body. And,
absolutely.
And nutrition, of course, was it's funny because we have this interpretation of somebody who's really muscular, that they must be, like that commercial, I pick things up and put them down. We think of that. But the truth is, a lot of people, because you have this goal of trying to get peak performance out of your body, you do research nutrition and understand, biology and science and all these, average person who exercises knows much more about nutrition and how the body works compared to the average person who doesn't. And I think a lot of it is kind of this stereotypical idea that you're just dumb and might not know too much. But really, I mean, some of the best supplements, some of Patrick Arnold and all these guys, I mean, these guys are super geniuses when it comes down to supplements and just creating these stuff and formulating this stuff. So it's similar to yourself. Like I said, like I got into nutrition too, but I was making all this same mistakes I'm sure you made, right? Like having to eat 3 times a day, never really keeping track of carbs, never trying to get as much protein as possible, and really trying to cut out fat, because I think at the time, like typically, it just seemed like common sense. If I want to lose fat, I don't eat fat. And those were all complete just, I guess, mistakes that we were making. And really just bad information and bad science and bad research. Now, were you making those same mistakes, and when did you start, or what helped you figure out that maybe some of that past information that we're reading and researching, some of that research was wrong?
Yeah, I would say in high school, definitely I was on the low-fat bandwagon or low-fat kick, where I would not eat an egg yolk, non-fat yogurt, non-fat ice cream. I would tell my mom the leanest cuts of beef, if I was going to eat beef. Chicken, would never eat it with the skin on it. And I did that for years, and at the same time ate like massive amounts of pasta and bread and other things that were high carb, even high sugar, and not fat. But at the time, my output was super high. Playing sports, working on a farm, just being outdoors, mountain biking, things like that. I had a really high output, and so I didn't really suffer the consequences of carbohydrate intolerance. But I would say when I studied nutrition in college, I got an appreciation. I think The Zone, the book called Barry Sears' book, The Zone, came out, and I started delving a little more into the research behind nutrition and kind of adopting this idea of, low glycemic carbs and adding more fat, because it was like really low fat, and adding more fat into my diet, instead of 12 egg whites, I would have 10 eggs with 2 yolks. Like I started, changing my diet in that way and just titrating the fat in, and I realized that it was having positive effects on my body composition changes and on my energy levels, more stable over time. But it was really high protein. It was kind of high protein, moderate fat and moderate carbs. And I kind of started gravitating more towards the ketogenic diet research and trying to, even though I'm in a pharmacology and physiology department, I thought it would be great if I could go back to nutrition and incorporate that into my actual research that I was doing at the university, at the medical school here. So sort of pitched the idea to the program managers at the Department of Defense and Office of Navy Research, level. And they were pretty supportive of developing kind of a metabolic-based strategy to target warfighter performance and warfighter resilience. And that was going on about 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago. It took me a couple years to pitch it and then actually start getting grants to fund the research that I do. But it took a while, and then when I'm looking at the research on the ketogenic diet, of course I want to follow very precisely the ketogenic diet that's used clinically. So I contacted researchers at Johns Hopkins. I contacted the leading researchers in this field and got all the equipment necessary to measure my urine ketones and blood ketones, and measuring with a scale out, very precise macronutrient ratios into my diet and eating that. And then I realized this is a diet, that I could actually follow. It was much higher. I mean, we in the lifting world, people call the keto diet like just a low carb diet, but that was really high in protein. But a clinically, implemented ketogenic diet is very high in fat relative to what the average fitness person thinks of as the ketogenic diet. Now the diet has been modified, and there's various forms of the diet, and the modified Atkins, also called the modified ketogenic diet, is actually the diet of choice for drug-resistant epilepsy in adults. And in the kids, they try to mostly still use the classical ketogenic diet, which is like 90% fat. But I experimented with all versions of the ketogenic diet and did some pretty comprehensive, testing on myself. And during this time, I was maintaining, trying to get to the gym as much as possible, as much as you can on a tenure-track faculty position where you're putting in a lot of hours a week, but still trying to get into the gym about twice a week to do the heavy compound movements, and realizing that, I wasn't really losing a whole lot of size and strength as long as, I adjusted my calories. I was essentially, what I did over the course of a year or two was sort of replace carbohydrates with fat as the primary fuel source.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the missing link with some people. I remember when the Atkins diet was getting really popular again, because it's actually an old diet. And that's something else I wanted to get into, was how some of these diets that seem to, some people think that they're trendy or new diets, like the Atkins diet or the ketogenic diet, how they've actually been around forever. Gary Taubes, I think, gets a little credit for writing about Dr. Atkins' diet in the early 2000s, and then kind of reigniting conversation around it. And then, but the missing link, I feel like, with the Atkins diet was high fats, right? Because it seems like a lot of people were cutting out the carbs, but they weren't increasing their fats. So there was just a lack of energy in general. And do you think that was the case with why some people felt so shitty on the Atkins diet?
Yeah, and I think it wasn't, it had to do with understanding what happens to your body physiologically too. And I could say it was not a super easy introduction into nutritional ketosis. So I kind of did more of a low carb approach first, and until I, at the same time as I was doing this high protein, low carb diet, so I get some in my throat.
Yeah, no problem.
I realized that it wasn't a ketogenic diet that was used clinically. So I went and, researched basically the clinical ketogenic diet and added more fat into my diet. And over time, you can literally feel your body kind of transitioning into using fat for fuel, because you have the effect of elevating ketones, which is not an effect that you typically see on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet, which is more similar to the Atkins diet that people were eating. So you get, it's carbohydrate restricted, and you're still getting an elevation of insulin from the protein, but you're not getting ketones. And I think that was kind of like the missing link in all this. As soon as I got my ketones elevated, and it was kind of neat to be able to track it with commercially available devices, and appreciating the understanding that when you elevate ketones, you're giving your body an alternative energy, your brain in particular, an alternative energy substrate. And maybe it was like part placebo effect. When you see ketones elevated, I was kind of happy knowing that, this energy was, making its way to the brain and supplying energy. So it was really kind of a learning curve of about 6 months, going from low carb, which was not a non-ketogenic low carb diet, to buying all the books that were kind of out. The first one, actually, I didn't have Jeff Bolick's book, which I recommend to a lot of people, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living. It's one of the best books out there for kind of the layman, but I was reading more of the sort of the clinical books that were out there on the ketogenic diet. The one by Johns Hopkins group, and there was a couple that were written more so for epilepsy, and had a kind of a rudimentary kind of outline of the ketogenic diet formulation. And I was doing it, formulating the ketogenic diet with a high amount of dairy fat, which I learned kind of later on through experimentation that I respond better if I kind of minimize the dairy fat or the dairy protein and dairy fat for me. So it's been a learning curve, just simply doing the ketogenic diet by, a macro approach. It's kind of if it fits your macros, but for ketogenic diet, it is important to get into nutritional ketosis, but I also found that certain foods and combinations of foods really work well with my body, and some foods don't work that well with my body over time. But this is more of an individual thing based on your own kind of immune system too, and kind of your gut tolerability. So it was definitely a learning process, and I would advise people, people who followed the Atkins diet early on that found it hard or difficult to follow, you kind of have to stick with it and experiment with it, and you have to make it work. The more you do it, the easier it gets, and the more benefits you'll derive from it, and the better you'll feel. So you really do have to stick with it, and not everybody's going to adapt to it. I realize now, and we could probably use various technologies to study this, but some people have higher rates of production of certain enzymes, fatty acid oxidation enzymes, than other people, and certain pathways may be more kind of open or active in other people, especially in regards to liver metabolism, or pancreatic function, or even gallbladder function. So some people just cannot tolerate fat like other people can, and other people can pound massive amounts of fat and be totally fine with it, while other people will have some major GI distress with fats. So this is something that I realized it's not a one-size-fits-all diet. You kind of have to make it work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard Rob Wolf talk about it on the Joe Rogan podcast, about how him and his wife will actually check their ketones, after eating certain foods, and how certain foods will get him out of ketosis much quicker than his wife, and vice versa. So yeah, it definitely doesn't work the same for everybody, and you kind of modify it to see what works best. Some people can have a little bit more carbs, some people less carbs. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing about diets, is that people get very even myself, I'm such a fan of this diet because I've seen what it's done for my life with inflammation, arthritis, just brain function. And one thing that you've talked a lot about, which I think is something that we all went through when we're weightlifting and we're eating so many calories and eating so often, is that you kind of feel like you're a slave or a victim to hunger. Like most of your day revolves around making sure you have access to food and you never really get hungry for too long. And it just, once I have 2 kids, and my son's 2.5 and my daughter's 10 months. And once you have kids, it's like you can't do that. And you don't have the time and energy to be making food every 3 hours like you used to. It's always about the kids first. And one thing I loved about the ketogenic diet is that I can go hours and hours without eating and without ever really feeling hungry. I kind of just eat when I feel like eating or when I have time to eat. And because of it, it's made my life so much easier and simpler, and I'm not stressing about being angry because I'm not, I haven't gotten food when I feel like I should have, and I'm not constantly just, like I said, like a slave to hunger and eating. And it's almost like you have control of your life again. It's kind of a weird thing to think of, but you don't really realize how much of your day revolves around making sure you have access to food and you're not hungry, and so I think from that aspect of it, it was a huge benefit. And I had really bad knees from squatting and playing basketball outdoors for years, and almost all my inflammation from my knees are completely gone. On weekends when I have a couple of drinks, like for example, like the 4th of July recently, I have a couple of drinks, just the extra sugar from the drinking and maybe a cheat meal here or there, my knee pain comes back. And then once I go a couple of days without consuming any a significant amount of carbs or sugars, then all of a sudden my joints feel amazing again. And it's just a huge benefit for inflammation and cognitive function and suppression of hunger. So there's all these benefits. So what is the history of the ketogenic diet? How old is it? Why is a diet that's been around for so long, why is it now being I guess popular again, or why is it there's so much talk around it, and what happened? Because it seems like there's a period of time, probably the same period of time you and I grew up, where there was all this like false information. Gary Taubes talks a lot about it, about how he realized there was all this just bad science or lack of science in the nutrition world. And I remember when I was going to school where it said, you had the food pyramid, and it said to have most of your food should be wheats and grains and all, was the bottom of the pyramid. Like, what happened that we had at one point? Because I believe at one point, right, people did eat higher fats diets, and then in the 60s and 50s, there's a good documentary, Sugar Coated, that kind of talks about this a little bit, about how eventually the sugar industry tries to deflect some of the attention from them onto fats, and then that's when you see all the low-fat yogurts and low-fat milk and all this stuff. Like, what happened that we got so far off the path of what we should be eating, and then we kind of made fats just be the, basically the thing that we focus the most on and try to eliminate the most out of our diet. And now you try to tell somebody that, hey, you should be eating fats, it's good for you, they look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah, well, that's a long story in and of itself, and I think Gary Taubes has done a good job, in his work with that. And I think I would direct your listeners to the lecture by Dr. David Diamond, who's a colleague of mine at the University of South Florida, the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition lecture series, and gave a great lecture on the history of fat and why fat was demonized, and I think that led to the explosion of the non-fat, diet being promoted, which is a fascinating kind of historical story in and of itself with Ansel Keys. But going back to the ketogenic diet, you asked about the history of the ketogenic diet, which is really a fascinating, and I'm kind of working on a book that I've kind of sidetracked for a little bit, but I'm going to get back to working on it. And actually, Rob Wolf, Travis Christofferson and I did a 3-part series on Rob Wolf's blog on the history of the ketogenic diet, part 1, part 2, and part 3, if listeners are interested in that. But in brief, about 100 years ago, the ketogenic diet was developed as a tool for epilepsy. I mean, there wasn't really drug-resistant epilepsy back then, but Russell Wilder at the Mayo Clinic developed this ketogenic diet, or a diet that he termed the ketogenic diet, because it produced ketonemia, which is an elevation of ketones in the blood, which is an observation that he saw when his patients got effective seizure control. So they called it the ketogenic diet. And this was back in 1921, so a long time ago. And it was used very it was like more or less a standard of care for epilepsy back then, because there was not the drugs that we have today. And then anticonvulsants kind of came around in like the 40s, 50s, and especially the 60s, there was a number of different drugs that came up. Dilantin, I think, phenobarbital was used. And so the drugs were just easier for the physicians to prescribe, and it was hard for parents to put their kids kind of on the ketogenic diet and measure out all the macronutrient ratios that would get into ketosis. So it wasn't really until 1994, and it was NBC's show Dateline, which I used to watch, all through high school and college, actually. And I remember actually seeing it, and it was before I knew anything about the ketogenic diet, the case of Charlie Abrams, which was the son of Hollywood producer Jim Abrams. Jim Abrams produced the movie Airplane, which was one of my favorite movies growing up as a comedy. And so he had a son, 2 or 3 years old, and he was suffering epilepsy and seizures that no matter what they did, he used a whole cocktail of pharmaceuticals to try to and had really horrible side effects with the drugs that he was giving his son for epilepsy, and took it upon himself to educate himself and went to the library and actually saw that the ketogenic diet was a standard of care in situations where drugs failed, but it was grossly underutilized. It was incredibly effective from the reports that he was reading. Even at that time, I don't think there was any large clinical trials yet, but the case reports indicated that it was very effective. And so Dateline NBC kind of reported this in 1994, the story of Charlie Abrams, and then it got like a big revival to the point where the American Epilepsy Society in 1996 started getting on board with this, and Jim, being a Hollywood producer, is a pretty influential guy, so really got Hollywood to stand behind it. And I think it was 1997 where one of Jim's friends in Hollywood was Meryl Streep, and really Meryl Streep became almost the poster child for the clinical use of the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. So she starred in a movie called First Do No Harm, which is a movie in the late 90s that came out about the ketogenic diet. And when that movie came out, and Meryl Streep really got a lot of publicity for the movie, and it just sort of got kicked off. And then you saw researchers now directing their efforts to understanding the ketogenic diet, and pharmaceutical companies even wanting to know, what's the neuropharmacological basis of the ketogenic diet, and can we make a drug to mimic the ketogenic diet? There's quite a few, companies wanting to understand that. So over a decade of research really supported the emerging data that happened after, say, 1997, really further supported the therapeutic efficacy of the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. And as people started studying it more, they understood that the ketones and just the state of nutritional ketosis was therapeutic for the brain, and it had other applications outside of epilepsy. So now, moving forward from 1997 to now, 20 years later, we host a conference at the University of South Florida where there's 600 people attend our conference, and we have the leading researchers from all around. We've had keynote speakers from Harvard and Yale and Johns Hopkins that present about not only epilepsy, but about Alzheimer's disease, about cancer, about autism, about a growing number of applications that are therapeutically responsive to the ketogenic diet or nutritional ketosis, which could be achieved by a variety of ways. It could be achieved, through low-carb intermittent fasting, or there's different types of ketogenic. There's the MCT-based ketogenic diet, the modified Atkins diet, the classical ketogenic diet. There's ketone supplementation, which we study pretty rigorously in the lab here, developing protocols for that. So it's been amazing in the short time that I've been researching this to see the whole field exploding. And if you get on PubMed and see, the number of hits is dramatically increasing. So it's nice to see that mainstream science and even clinical science is starting to fall back on nutrition as a therapy.
So the guy who brought us great movies like Naked Gun and Airplane is one of the
Exactly.
Those two movies were awesome. Yeah, I've never seen that other movie with Meryl Streep. I'm actually really curious. The whole movie was based on the ketogenic diet. Was it like somebody who had a medical issue and then the ketogenic diet helped them? Is that
so the story First Do No Harm that stars Meryl Streep is the story of Jim Abrams. It's Jim Abrams' story. Jim doesn't star in it. He was part of producing it, and I don't think Charlie Abrams, who I've met Jim Abrams and had dinner with him and done interviews with Jim Abrams, and I've met his son Charlie Abrams too. They were not actually in the movie. They got actors for the movie, but the movie First Do No Harm, which is available I think for free, like you can look it up on YouTube, is a documentary that it precisely documents their story, like what they went through from the very beginning when Charlie was basically on like a half dozen different medications that were not controlling his seizures. And I think Jim really at that point thought his son was going to die. And he took it upon himself to educate himself about other alternative therapies. And when he came across the ketogenic diet, it was not really an alternative therapy in the sense of we understand, alternative medicine. It was a proven sort of standard of care for drug-resistant epilepsy, which was his son had. So, and he brought it to the attention of his doctor. And at the time, I think the first doctor was not really supportive of it, but Jim took it upon himself to go to Johns Hopkins. They had the most active ketogenic diet clinic there, and got him, some qualified registered dietitians and clinicians. John Freeman, I think, who passed away in 2012, I think, but with John Freeman and his predecessor, Eric Kossoff, now runs the epilepsy clinic at Johns Hopkins, were really the two pioneers that really helped advance the use of the ketogenic diet for epilepsy. And now I think there's about 150 to 200 clinics across the United States and across the world. So now it's global. I think the Charlie Foundation is more of a global foundation now, with clinics all over the world that have neurologists and working with registered dietitians who can implement the diet. And next week, I will be at the Glucose Transporter Type 1 Deficiency Syndrome Conference. And kids with glucose transporter 1 deficiency, they lack the ability to transport glucose across the blood-brain barrier. So the standard of care for a child who has this deficiency syndrome is the ketogenic diet, and it's really the only therapy we have to offer them now. So I will be kind of next week, I'll be in Nashville, Tennessee, and showcasing the latest research that we have. And the Johns Hopkins group will be there. Eric Kossoff will be presenting. Dr. DeVivo, Dr. Pasquale, these guys have been pioneers in advancing the use of the ketogenic diet for that disorder. And also, there's also various drugs too that can be used, but the diet seems to work better than any drug that we currently have available for that disorder. So there's a growing list of metabolic-based disorders, and many of them are seizure disorders that are highly responsive to the ketogenic diet. So many clinicians or neurologists are kind of pushing the drug side and choosing to use the ketogenic diet to manage their patients' syndrome, especially with a number of disorders that are very responsive to the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, I feel like that's an issue in the medical field in general, where they'll look to a drug first before they look to nutrition or diet, or functional medicine and functional doctors now. That seems to be a growing trend. And before it was looked at kind of like pseudoscience, but now people are really looking at the benefits of it. And do you think that there's a little bit of a battle between looking at nutrition and diet as a possible benefit to medical issues, or is there pushback to that? Do you think that the medical or the pharmaceutical companies, would they rather have something like you said that mimics the reaction instead of actually getting people on the diet itself?
Yeah, if they had the ketogenic diet in the drug, that would quickly replace the ketogenic diet. I guess you could maybe think of what we're working on. We're working on developing exogenous ketone supplements. So these come in the form of ketone esters or ketone salts, which are formulations of ketones that can be consumed orally or even IV, that can rapidly put you in a state of nutritional ketosis and basically feed your brain ketones. And we know that ketones have this anticonvulsant effect. I teach at a medical school, and I was even served on the medical curriculum committee. And the issue is that with the national boards that you have to take to become a doctor, there's no nutritional questions on there. So the students don't really have to know that, and schools are really their main goal is to ensure that their students get the highest scores on the USMLE's the board test, right? And to do that, their curriculum is already compressed as it is, so there's really no room to fit in nutrition science into the existing curriculum, and because you're pushing other stuff off that would help your students do better on the boards. So the way I see it, I think the national boards need to be changed, and there needs to be some nutrition in the board, some basic clinical nutrition, and then medical schools would be forced essentially to teach a block of nutrition in their teaching curriculum, and which would include a couple lectures on the ketogenic diet, and of course you could expand beyond the applications of epilepsy, and then students would get that information, and when they go into practice, they would be more likely to remember that and to know that that's a viable metabolic-based therapy that they could use to manage their patients, not only epilepsy, but maybe type 2 diabetes, maybe as an adjunct to cancer, or maybe even for a neurological disease like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease, where the research is a little more it's emerging, and the big clinical trials have not been done yet, but to have it as a possible alternative approach to manage that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's an interest there. There's definitely an interest in the students. So the students, will contact me because they know I do research in this area, and they say, we want to learn more about the field of research that you're in. So some of the the medical school, the classes here, they have like their functional medicine group, or they have kind of like their integrative medicine group, where they'll have like lunch symposiums or lunch seminar series, and they'll have people like me or other speakers in this field come in and give a lecture, and it's not part of their curriculum, but they're asking to hear it because they know it's going to be important, or they feel it's important for their overall medical knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like all these fields will eventually cross paths, and the more you learn from, and it always seems like the people who come up with a breakthrough idea or research is always somebody who dabbles in something maybe outside their expertise, and you find benefits somewhere else. So it's it's really interesting. So the common thing, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, like the common thing, we've been talking about a high-fat diet. And for so long, we've been told that you need to keep your cholesterol levels down, that you can't have too much fat because it'll cause you'll get a heart attack, a heart disease, all these things, clogged arteries, all this stuff. For the person who is hearing this and saying, well, what about all these possible effects of having a high-fat diet? How can we say that this is a healthy and useful diet?
So a high-fat diet in the context of carbohydrate restriction, where you have more or less suppressed insulin levels, which can facilitate the burning of fat, is for most people, you can't make a blanket statement, but for most people, if they follow low carb, remember a ketogenic diet as it's implemented clinically is a pretty restrictive, severe even diet with like 90% fat, right? And like 10 or 8% protein. But the ketogenic diet, the kind of I like to talk about is more of like the modified ketogenic diet, sort of the modern version of it, which is like 20 to 25% protein, more liberal in protein, 5 to at the very most 10% carbohydrates in the form of fibrous carbohydrates, and with the balance being fats. And fats from saturated fat should not be demonized. And there's enough information out there now, I think, that the thing that doctors are taught to treat if they see it is an elevation in LDL and LDLP. I think from my perspective, if all other biomarkers are going in the right direction, that should not be an issue. It should not be an independent issue. If your inflammation goes down, if your triglycerides go down, if your glucose is more stable, I think it's important to measure insulin too, which I do. If that's low, I don't see, and even the information that comes with the statins, when you get them, the packet of information says that you should not rely on a sole biomarker like LDL to administer a statin. It specifically says not to do that. So, but if you have if your lipid profile looks scary to the point where your triglycerides are elevated and many of the other things going on, I think a statin could be warranted in certain situations. But the main pushback to a high-fat diet, or in particular a high-saturated fat diet, is the high LDL. And I have not seen evidence as a single biomarker that that's an important thing to worry about. And I can't tell you how many emails I get asking about this question. And it seems to be probably the most asked question of people who follow ketogenic diet, because many of them see a doubling or sometimes even a tripling of their LDL cholesterol. And, the knee-jerk reaction is to quickly get off of the diet and go back to normal. But I think if all other biomarkers are in good shape, especially your triglycerides are good. So I see no reason of getting off the diet. Occasionally you'll see the person whose triglycerides skyrocket on the ketogenic diet. And I think in that case, that person is just really not tolerating fat very well. So their fat metabolism is kind of sluggish, and that fat is staying in their bloodstream and perhaps becoming oxidized, and it may be a good idea for them not to follow the ketogenic diet. But the majority of people, if they stick to it long enough, can adapt to a ketogenic diet and reap some of the real benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the cholesterol thing, because anytime I talk to somebody about it, it always seems to be the thing that they worry about. It's like, well, I already have borderline high cholesterol, or, I have a family member who had a heart attack. I'm not going to, I can't increase my fats, especially it's almost like the power of propaganda. We've been told for so long, low fat everything, the low fat yogurt, low fat milk, all this stuff. But it's weird because when you have a kid, what's one thing that they really focus on is trying to give it healthy fats, and then as you get older, which is weird because it's like, well, we kind of agree for a child, a newborn, that giving it healthy fats is crucial and very important. And then as we get older, we get off it and we say it's bad. And so it is kind of weird, but it's the common argument or the common thing. And I know there's research now that shows that dietary cholesterol has a very little effect on your actual cholesterol levels, and it seems like it's a much more complicated of an issue than what your 5-minute doctor visit tries to break it down to. Oh, there's good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, keep your cholesterol down at this number, and it seems like they simplify it, but it's much more, because I've heard people like you've been on our show, Rhonda Patrick, and people like you two break it down, and it's just like it seems like there's much more to it, and good cholesterol is not always good, and bad cholesterol is not always bad, and there's all this breakdown to it. And how much of it is just to simplify it for the average person? Just, hey, here's a rough, easy way of understanding it. And also, like I said before, I know that I've heard about research saying that dietary cholesterol has little effect on your cholesterol levels. Is that true? Have you also seen research that dictates the same?
That dietary fat or has an impact on?
Well, because if you increase your fats, there's also a chance that you're going to eat things that have higher cholesterol, right? So
yeah, dietary cholesterol.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think dietary cholesterol probably has a minimal effect on fat. But I think, as we increase fat, one of the functions of cholesterol, or lipoproteins, should kind of put it in that context, is that they are carriers of fat. They're carriers of triglyceride. So the more fat we eat, the more we have to ramp up our fat carrying capacity by increasing the amount of lipoprotein molecules to be able to transport the fat. So you think of like little boats, right? Little boats need to carry the fat around, and those lipoproteins, LDL, is kind of like the little boats that's carrying around the fat that we're consuming to transport it for. It's part of the metabolic machinery that allows for the breakdown and the assimilation of fat in the body. So I think it's natural to see an elevation of that. Much of what we know, and I think the expert on this would be Ronald Krauss, and I think Rhonda Patrick had him on the show, and I've met with him before and talked with him about this subject at a meeting or two, and kind of get a feel for his thoughts on this. And I think the general consensus is that we do not know what an elevation of LDL means in the context of the ketogenic diet, because much of the research is done on LDL, elevated LDL, and some of the data does indicate that it could be atherogenic or correlates with atherogenic sort of effects or tendencies, but that's not it. The research is not done in the context of a ketogenic diet where other biomarkers are improving. And I think that's a really important consideration. It needs to be viewed in the context of the ketogenic diet. And it's probably a little too early to completely say that doesn't matter, but from my perspective and following my own health and just kind of following the health of some other people that have been on it, I see no negative consequences to an elevation of LDL if other biomarkers are in check.
Now,
and that's an ongoing conversation in the low carb community, and there's some people who feel strongly one way or the other way, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, people are very passionate about their dietary views and what I've had conversations with people, and they're if they have a diet that works for them, they very much defend it at all costs. But like you've said numerous of times, it's not one size fits all. Sometimes some things do work better for others, and so it is interesting. So what do you eat on a daily? So for somebody who's listening and hears us talking about high fats, but don't really know what is off limits, what's on limits, like for example, what do you eat on a daily basis? What's some of your go-to foods, to keep yourself in ketosis and burning fats?
Yeah, I'm kind of a creature of habit, so I tend to eat maybe. My wife more or less does shopping, but I probably eat about 20 different foods, and she may eat like about 30 or 40 different ones when we go to the shopping center. So on a normal, like this morning, I did have breakfast this morning. I don't always have breakfast, but usually I do. And I buy happy eggs, eggs that are from chickens, free range. So if you go to the store, I also encourage people to buy, eggs that are from free range chickens. So Happy Eggs is the brand that I buy. So I had three eggs, whole eggs, and actually had some turkey salad from I had the night before, and with a lot of olive oil, and I cooked the eggs in coconut oil. And I went pretty much most of the day. I ate that pretty early in the morning, and just like an hour or two before I connected with you, which was around 4 o'clock, I had 2 cans of sardines. So I'm getting back. I typically, a lot of times I don't eat in the middle of the day, or I test ketone supplements during the day because I'm always formulating and testing different things. But I just got back from this NASA NEMO mission, which was kind of underwater mission, and I wanted to bring my body weight down a little bit for some of the physical exams, just to kind of fit the requirements that I needed to for that particular thing. So sometimes I adjust my body weight depending on kind of the things that I'm doing physically. And for dinner, I use a service called ButcherBox, and they provide incredible meats from grass-fed cows, and they have chickens and pigs that you can buy. So we have some steaks from them, and we tend to get the fatty cuts. And I make a salad that's like really high in fat. So I will have a range of different greens and an avocado and olive oil and some crushed like walnuts in it or something. So that's kind of my diet. And I do drink coffee with medium chain triglyceride powder. I'll mix in with it, and I have Kerrygold butter I also mix in with it. And the ketone supplements that I consume and formulate during the day are also pretty high in medium chain triglycerides. So I essentially think of them as like kind of a liquid fat. They more or less fit into that fat macronutrient. So on paper, my diet looks like a modified Atkins diet.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing about the ketogenic diet. For anybody like yourself and I who've been into exercising and athletics, we're kind of used to being disciplined. We eat what we know we should be eating or what we think is healthy at the moment. You know, when we first start working out, I'm sure protein shakes taste like garbage, just like, when you were working out, and you just put them down because you thought that that's what you needed and that's what would make you bigger. And so I feel like we're pretty disciplined, but like I tell people, I'm like, the ketogenic diet, there's so many nutritional, delicious things that are not off limits. You know, like you can still put cream in your coffee or butter or MCT oil, all these things that help, time release the caffeine and keep you full for a long period of time. And, certain cheeses, right? Certain cheeses are still good for you. I think the majority of them, right, are decent, right?
Yeah, if I take in a lot of dairy protein, and I said this before, I think I start to get like a little bit maybe nasally congestion too. And if I drink a whey protein shake, forget about it. Like it'll tend to irritate my stomach a little bit. But cheese is one of the things that I mentioned that I do limit dairy, but I have cheese almost every day, and I just limit the amount, to a couple slices or maybe a tablespoon of Parmesan cheese. I'll put like on a salad or a particular dish that I'm making, and I occasionally use a little bit of heavy cream here and there, but I've been supplementing concentrated coconut milk or coconut cream in place of that. And what else? Oh, sour cream. So I tend to get about a cup of sour cream a day, and that's my main probably source of dairy would be sour cream. And I make a ketogenic mousse out of that every night, and I use a combination of sour cream and coconut cream and dark baking chocolate or chocolate protein powder, and usually like a quarter or a third of a cup of wild blueberries in that with maybe a little bit of stevia. So it's something that I mix up every night and just kind of my go-to snack food at night. And it's very ketogenic. It's like on paper, I think it's the way I put it together, it's about 90% fat.
Yeah, and the thing is, there's ketogenic alternatives to almost everything. I've had my wife make us ketogenic lasagna, ketogenic pizza, and I know Quest now makes a lot of ketogenic, like frozen foods. And
they do. Yep.
Yeah. So you're not really that deprived. And I mean, we don't realize it, but a lot of the taking fats away from foods seemed like it kind of took the flavor out of foods, and now you're putting it back in your life, and a lot of things taste much better when you're adding heavy fats into it. So it's not one of those diets where you feel like you're depriving yourself. So it is still enjoyable. And I'm Portuguese, so I eat sausage and cheese all the time. And one thing I've noticed, like sometimes late at night, I'll have some cheese and a glass of wine. And I still stay in ketosis if I just kind of have a small glass of wine and stuff like that. So everybody is different. You need to check your ketone levels. What's the most accurate way of checking your ketones? Is it your urine? Is it, I know you can even check it from breathing, right? But there are different types of ketones you're checking too.
Yeah, there's 3 ways that I recommend people checking. One is just your standard keto sticks that you can pick up at any Walgreens, CVS, or any pharmacy. And it's a urine stick, and it detects the ketone acetoacetate. And there's a color indicator on the back of the container that it comes in, and you can detect the relative level of ketosis that you're in. And that is good to use initially if you're like a newbie and just getting into this. The urine ketone sticks are pretty handy and pretty useful to determine if you're even in a state of ketosis. And if you've kind of confirmed that you're in ketosis and you want to get maybe a higher level of granularity into exactly where your levels of ketones are, Abbott Labs makes the Precision Extra meter, which is a blood glucose and ketone meter, and you can buy it on Amazon or various diabetes kind of wholesale online places. And that will give you a measure of your blood beta hydroxybutyrate, and the levels you're kind of looking for would be above 0.5. You know, I feel best around 1 to 2 millimolar is the units that it records in. And another kind of interesting device that's out now is the Ketonics breath acetone or breath ketone meter. And I have a couple sitting on my desk now that I've been testing, and I really like it. And parents seem to like it too, especially if their kids have epilepsy or seizures. They can blow into this device, and it reads a color, you know, blue being kind of low or no ketones, and then green and yellow and red. And it's non-invasive, so you don't have to, the kids don't have to deal with like the finger prick. So, and breath acetone levels, which is a byproduct of your body making ketones. Acetoacetate can spontaneously decarboxylate to acetone, and it occurs at a certain rate in the body that's very predictable. So the breath acetone is a pretty reliable predictor of you being in a state of ketosis. You would not be breathing out acetone if you were not in a state of ketosis. So it's a pretty reliable indicator of ketosis. And breath acetone correlates remarkably well, some studies show, to seizure control. So so those three measurements are pretty good. I tend to carry the blood ketone meter in with me at all time. I have the Freestyle meter. It's also made by Abbott's Lab. It's a little bit lower profile, and for me it's a little bit more accurate than the Abbott Precision Extra. And these devices are relatively cheap to buy. The strips can be a little expensive, and I think they're really good to use if you're just getting into understanding nutritional ketosis, because the more you kind of, you know, develop and formulate your diet and eat it and check your ketones, and you understand that you are in ketosis, then you start to realize the benefits. And sometimes I work backwards. Like I'll follow the ketogenic diet and eat a certain way and start shifting my macros around or taking a supplement. And when I feel a particular way, if I feel especially lucid or energetic, at that point I will check my ketones. And it's like, bam, so it's 1.3 or 1.4. And then I can rely on that data, which I keep in a journal, and I can look back on it after weeks and months of doing this and identify the levels of ketones where I feel optimal, where I feel, you know, most energetic and most lucid, and kind of the level that, you know, that works best for me, I guess I would say. And I encourage other people to do that, to, you know, document your level of ketosis. And you can do kind of, you know, it's important to measure your ketones at a particular time every day. If you're going to do it, and not just randomly throughout the day. You want to pick a particular time. For me, I like to do mid to late afternoon, kind of after I've eaten a relatively small ketogenic breakfast, and then maybe 6 or 7 hours later in the mid part of the day, maybe I've had some coffee with an MCT powder in it or whatever, then my body is kind of really cranking out ketones in the latter half of the day before my dinner, actually. And I'd kind of do it within that particular window.
Now, is there a certain amount of carbs you try to stay below daily, and sugar? Because that's something, you know, the ketogenic diet, obviously, that we emphasize carbs and try to take in, you know, very little carbs. But is sugar also something that you just try to completely remove from your diet, or do you still take in some?
Well, I think it's kind of hard to completely remove it out of your diet, but try to minimize it. It's more about the ratios, right? If you want to try the ketogenic diet, it's going to be everyone has a different carbohydrate set point, at which point they will enter a state of ketosis. And some athletes, I've talked to athletes and at first I requested them to send me the data to actually what the foods they were eating because I didn't believe it. But there's some athletes out there that are, exercising. I think they're over-exercising, 5, 6, 7 hours a day, and they're eating, 250, 300 grams of carbs a day, and they're staying in some pretty high to moderate ketosis, even higher than me. But
Wow.
I'm pretty much sitting at my desk all day or standing at my desk all day. And they are getting in, but they're, and they're eating dark chocolate. They're not drinking Gatorade, but they do have some dark chocolate in there. They tend to eat, some fruits, lots of nuts, and kind of more of a slow burning carbohydrate source. And then other people, they can drop their carbohydrates to 10 grams a day and still have a hard time kind of hitting the numbers on ketones. So it is variable between people. But generally speaking, if you restrict calories or you have a high energy output as far as you're exercising, your ketone levels are going to go up. And that's going to be your ketone levels are a direct reflection of fat oxidation in the liver. So if you're mobilizing free fatty acids from adipose, those fatty acids go to the liver and they get oxidized to the point where you kind of generate a molecule, acetyl-CoA, and then that, if it's not used, feeds into this ketogenesis, which is the formation of ketone bodies in the liver. And the primary function of those ketone bodies are, I think, is to preserve and ensure that the central nervous system has an adequate supply of energy. And when you're exercising, your skeletal muscles are sucking up a lot of glucose too. So I think you tend to produce a lot of ketones, towards the latter half of a prolonged exercise. So there's a phenomenon called post-exercise ketosis that's often seen in athletes. And that's what I see in athletes that even consume a relatively high amount of carbohydrates, they can get into a state of ketosis. That's pretty impressive.
Now,
they're benefiting from that too. So I think there's a lot of benefits to ketosis. You mentioned anti-inflammatory effects, or that you've seen with it, and that's something I see almost ubiquitously throughout the exercise community, is that their inflammation rates go down.
Oh, absolutely. And I've had friends of mine who I've, just from talking about the ketogenic diet and stuff like that, who have given it a try. And that's, they almost consistently all have the three, I think, most typical benefits, which is some joint relief or joint pain relief, some cognitive function increase and better cognitive function, and then suppression of hunger. It seems like that just seems down the board. You'll have some benefits, or either all three or one of the three. And but with athletes, I was always really interested with high intensity athletes, people who have to be explosive. I know some people say that you can't really just burn fat at the rate that you can burn carbs. So is that still some, I guess, research that's still developing? People are still trying to figure out if athlete can actually be a full ketogenic athlete and still perform at peak performance?
Yeah, that's going to depend on the intensity of the exercise, whether you're using fat versus carbs, but you're always using a mix, right? But the proportion of carbs or glucose or sugar that you're using will be more skewed to, to higher glucose with higher intensity. It's important to recognize that the ketogenic diet is carbohydrate sparing or glycogen sparing. So if you have two athletes and one is kind of this, if they're both the same kind of athletic potential or the same elite level performance, and one is adapted to burning carbohydrates for fuel and the other is adapted to burning fat and ketones for fuel, and they're running an ultramarathon race, the person that's burning fat and ketones for fuel will actually have the same, relatively about the same level of muscle glycogen. Their liver glycogen may be a little bit depleted relative to the high carb person, but their muscle glycogen is not all that different from the research that has been done. And if both of those people start running, by the time they're halfway through, the person who is adapted to a ketogenic diet will likely have more glycogen in their muscles, just due to the glycogen sparing effect of being able to access fat more effectively for fuel and utilizing ketones as an energy source for the central nervous system. So they'll be essentially sparing the muscle glycogen. And this, I think, is one of the major benefits. And then you brought up the appetite suppressing effect. And I think that's a really important thing to consider with the ketogenic diet. And I'd have to say that I think a lot of the benefits of low carb and a lot of the benefits of the ketogenic diet in particular are not necessarily due to, that specific macronutrient ratio, or maybe even due to the effects of ketones. I just think it's when you're eating a ketogenic diet, you tend not to overeat. And it could be, some people argue, you don't overeat because it tastes so bad, right? Because it's a restrictive diet. But I do think that there's an appetite suppressing effect of the ketogenic diet, and it controls your appetite in such a way that you just don't overeat. And so you maintain kind of a low level of calorie restriction for the most part, and it may fluctuate a little bit, but you can reap the benefits, and we know there are many benefits of calorie restriction, and it's more easy to get those benefits with a ketogenic diet because you can achieve it without being hungry. And you're not hungry because you don't have those blood glucose fluctuations. You don't have those dips in blood glucose that typically make you very hungry. Or if your blood glucose does dip, I should correct. So your glucose may dip down, but you don't feel that hypoglycemic effect because you have ketones in your bloodstream, which is kind of preserving and sustaining CNS function, your brain function.
Well, one thing, the thing about the appetite suppression is that sometimes I worry that if I have a day where I play basketball at night, I went to the gym in the morning, so I burn a lot of calories, and I get home and I'm still not that hungry. I haven't ate that many calories throughout the day. And then I wonder if I'm not consuming enough food, just in general, for my body to recover. Is that something that I should be concerned about? Or is that, should I just kind of read my body, and if my body's not asking for more food, then I should just be okay? Or, because I'm just wondering sometimes if a lack of protein or a lack of food is maybe making me sore for a day or two longer. I'm not recovering fast enough because I might not be eating. But when I'm on this high-fat diet, I'm really just not hungry, even if I am more active.
Yeah, I think you need to use a variety of things to assess that, to assess your calorie needs, right? Your body composition, probably first and foremost, your strength, your performance, and kind of just how you feel. Like your energy levels will dip over time if you're chronically calorie restricted. So you need to look at a number of variables. I think body composition is really important, the amount of lean body mass that you have, and that's staying stable. And if you do find yourself kind of looking smaller in the mirror or drinking up, or your strength, if you do resistance training, I think resistance training on a regular basis is really important, especially to choose particular exercise and do them with relative frequency, like every week, because that can give you an index of your overall strength, like things like squats and deadlifts. A good barometer, if you will, for the level of strength that you have. And if you see those numbers consistently going down, that's an indication that you probably need to get more protein and that you are losing muscle mass, which would also be reflected if you're measuring body composition with scale, weight, body calipers. There's a number of ways that you can do it, DEXA being the gold standard. So there's a number of things, if you're really into it, that you should be tracking if overall performance optimization is your goal.
Yeah, but isn't it true also that just losing weight is, for example, like when you're on the ketogenic diet, a lot of times people lose body fat, and can that have some effect on your strength level? So it can be a little deceiving because you might just be losing a little bit of strength just from losing overall weight.
Yeah. So that, especially initially, I would say, and I tell people this, that your muscles may kind of burn off some of the muscle glycogen, and you may become flat, which we say. Your muscles will be less full over time. But if you stick with the ketogenic diet, you'll fill back up again if you're, maintaining your calories, and just maybe run a couple days of surplus calories just to fill back out. And then you have some electrolyte shifts too, where the ketogenic diet tends to suppress the hormone insulin, or you don't have spikes in insulin, and insulin plays a big role in sodium reabsorption. So you tend to kind of lose some sodium too, so you should probably add more sodium back in, especially when you start the diet. And then in a couple of weeks, your body, your electrolytes balance out. Again, your physiology is pretty good in regards to adapting to certain eating strategies. But initially, you may have a diuretic effect, which will invariably cause a little bit of a performance decrement in the gym. But you can mitigate a lot of that just by ensuring that your calories are sufficient. When you get into when you first start a ketogenic diet and you have liberal amounts, you add liberal amounts of salt to your food and drink a lot of water to offset that diuretic effect, which occurs with the transition into ketosis.
And salt's been another thing that's kind of been demonized, right? It's something that probably isn't quite as bad for you as people in the past have been told.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually a big fan of salt. So even as a performance enhancement substance, so making, even adding some salt to, if I take a ketone supplement or some kind of drink, or even, any kind of food prior to exercise, or prior to some of the work that I did when I was on this last mission with NASA over the few weeks, we would do what's called an EVA. We would go outside and do extravehicular activity in the underwater habitat, and I would totally sodium load before getting into that, doing that activity, which could span between 4 to 6 hours of kind of intense focused work. And because the first time I forgot to drink and take in a lot of salt, and I started getting a lot of cramps towards the end. The underwater habitat can kind of have a diuretic effect on you. So I really had to sodium load before doing that, and then that completely eliminated the performance effects, negative performance effects, which was cramping and just some issues I had with dehydration towards the end. And the ketogenic diet, one of the side effects, I think, is that it does have a diuretic effect. And some people like that because you kind of always run a little bit tighter skin, and you just tend to be a little bit leaner, not holding excess water. And it's just a few pounds usually, but I think it does necessitate kind of more frequently, consuming some salt too, especially if you're sweating and excess fluids. And that would even be true even if you are adapted to the diet. Your kidneys do adapt remarkably well to the point where, you don't have the same diuretic effect as when you started, but I think people who choose to stay in a state of nutritional ketosis need to take in a little bit more salt and more fluids from what I've seen, and also extra potassium. And I think even clinically, one of the required supplements for a ketogenic diet would be potassium citrate, but I think you can get it into your diet in different ways too. So.
Now,
and magnesium is something too that I think is important. So magnesium is one of the few supplements. I don't take many supplements, but I do take a magnesium supplement.
So yeah, because that's something else that I wanted to ask you about was supplements, and if what you take with them, if any supplements, for example, pretend you want to do the ketogenic diet, for example, and I want to take a pre-workout drink, some nitric oxide or something like that. Is there certain things that people should stay away from that might get you out of ketosis, or certain supplements in general, creatines or anything like that you probably aren't recommended to use while trying to do the ketogenic diet?
Well, I'm actually a fan of creatine, and I think creatine can kind of go well with a ketogenic diet when you start too, because it helps you actually retain a little bit of water if you do some creatine loading when you start the ketogenic diet, and it definitely doesn't kick you out of ketosis. As far as supplements to take or not take, I would say just read the label and just make sure whatever supplement, if it's a nitric oxide supplement, that's some kind of powder drink that you mix up, just make sure it doesn't have things like, it might not be, sugar on the label, but things like dextrose or maltodextrin, things like that can kind of kick you out of ketosis. And then you can get kind of like a hypoglycemic effect when you take it, that kind of feeling. So, I would say there's some information that caffeine can actually stimulate endogenous ketone production and can increase it, probably just by mobilizing more fat into the bloodstream, which goes to the liver and can make ketones. So fat may actually be a ketogenic enhancer just by virtue of its ability to mobilize fat for fuel. And let me see, I'm thinking about things contradictory. I don't think I'm a believer in magnesium supplementation, and it's something that was low in me when I got things checked out. I was tend to run a little bit low in magnesium, and some of the clinical studies that I've seen with the ketogenic diet and also with fasting show that magnesium tends to tank, and magnesium is used for hundreds of different metabolic reactions. So I think it's important to make sure that you have at least adequate levels, and I supplement to the point where I have like high normal levels, not, within physiological range, but I'd rather it be kind of a little bit on the high end to ensure that that mineral is there for numerous metabolic reactions and enzymatic reactions that it's required for. And also cramping. So I used to get quite a bit of cramps when I started the ketogenic diet. That was probably one of the main side effects that I had, and that was virtually eliminated when I started supplementing with magnesium. So it's something I tend to recommend to people that want to try the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, so definitely get some electrolytes and yeah, absolutely. Now, I know we're taking a lot of your time. I don't want to take much more, but I know there are people who've talked about good fats and bad fats. When you're on the ketogenic diet and you're trying to increase your fats, is there any type of fats you should kind of stay away from? Is there such thing as bad fats?
I think I would want to recommend sort of minimizing processed vegetable oil fats, the omega-6 fats. And I think, you want to use an online tracking device so you can look at the ratio of your omega-6 to omega-3 fats. And omega-6 are essential fats to some extent, but we don't need an overabundance of them in the diet. So optimally, I think it's actually good to have a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 of like a 1-to-1. And it kind of might be hard to get if you don't supplement, but I think that may be ideal from my perspective. And the big question I get is about saturated fat. So should I be concerned about saturated fat? All this kind of fear-mongering about coconut oil being bad recently. Something came out. I didn't even read it because I'm just kind of oblivious to those things that I know is not true. I can't state enough that saturated fat, really has been demonized, and a lot of people will point a finger to something like steak or beef being like super high, but steak's actually like monounsaturated fat. A lot of it's like mono, and even egg. So an egg yolk is mostly oleic acid, which is monounsaturated fat. But things like medium chain triglycerides, coconut oil, and dairy does have kind of a higher percentage of saturated fat. I don't think these things are things. They're normal components of a diet. Your saturated fats are awesome fuels for the body to burn, for the heart and the muscles. And it may be what I found that when I started the ketogenic diet and first started experimenting with what was used clinically, that I got a very high percentage of my fat from dairy fat, which was high in saturated. And when I switched and when I reduced the dairy fat and got more monounsaturated fat from macadamia nuts and from egg yolk and fatty fish, my LDL cholesterol went down. So it was like spiked up 2 or 3 times normal, and now it's actually down to like normal. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing or what, but I tend to mention it, and I tend to. I also felt that when I reduced my saturated fat from something like 250 grams per day, which I was when I started, down to maybe like 70 grams a day of saturated fat from dairy sources, I generally felt better. So I'm just throwing that out there because some users may want to experiment with a ketogenic diet that's lower in dairy fat. Traditionally, a ketogenic diet has been primarily almost like all dairy fat for some kids. So, and many parents have contacted me and said that, when they switched out and they reduced the amount of dairy in their child's ketogenic diet, they actually have better seizure control. So it's just something that I throw out there. It's something to consider if you're experimenting with the ketogenic diet. Because it's easy to hit those ratios with dairy fat, but not as easy to find other fat sources to make up, that amount of calories.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there an age that you would say, like for example, I have two kids, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Is there ever a too young of an age to start getting them on something similar to a ketogenic diet, trying to increase their fats? And you know, because unfortunately, when like my son is 2.5, I mean, everything that's made for kids is just full of sugar, and it's impossible to find something. I mean, luckily he likes eggs, and so that's a source of fats and proteins for him. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot of other stuff that's high in fat that I can get him to eat. But is there is it ever too young to kind of think about getting your children on a ketogenic-ish diet?
You know, not from my perspective. I think eggs and egg yolks are like great. You know, dairy, full-fat dairy is probably fine for kids in moderation, and nuts are great. I mean, nuts provide the building blocks, have many components of the things that your brain and central nervous system is made up with. Fatty fish is great. You know, chicken with the skin, of course, and you know, and other things like hummus and legumes. I think kids are the exception. I think a lot of people, the people who could benefit from the ketogenic diet most are typically older. Like as we age, our carbohydrate tolerance goes down, especially in our 50s and 60s, and even 40s. I'm in my 40s and noticed it a little bit. So I think, you know, as we age, I think it's more important to consider low carb in a ketogenic diet. But kids generally have, you know, a pretty robust metabolism and can tolerate a relatively high amount of carbohydrates. Well, obviously, we do have a childhood obesity problem. So I think, you know, we're definitely feeding them too much. So parents need to look at the total amount of sugar that they're feeding. So whenever possible, try to eliminate, you know, a lot of excess sugar. But I'm not the person who kind of believes that sugar is necessarily the problem. I don't want to demonize it, because I grew up eating a ton of sugar and was kind of okay, you know, but I do think, and I don't know if it's the root cause of the obesity problem now. I know the overconsumption is definitely a cause, and that's probably more of an appetite issue and maybe an activity issue. But whenever possible, I think it's important for parents to stick with whole foods as opposed to processed foods, and just simply do it like that, and just go to just the general. I don't think a kid's diet, if you want to put your child on more of a low carb diet, just pick the foods that the low carb community adults are using, and have. I don't think kids need to eat anything different really from adults, and there are many different books out there. If you just Google ketogenic cookbooks, you know, there's tons of stuff, even free online, which have dozens and hundreds of recipes for ketogenic diet. I mean, things that I never even thought of, would just even ketogenic ice cream recipes, which is a great way to get some calories into your children, and ketogenic pizza recipes, which are foods that kids tend to gravitate towards. So that might be the strategy. Look at the various, consider various comfort foods, and then look up ketogenic versions of those comfort foods, even cookies.
Yeah, I think Rule.me, I think, is a real popular one that has.
I was going to mention that one.
That's one of the first ones I went to that had. I mean, it literally had an alternative to everything you could think of. It has dinner recipes, lunch, breakfast, desserts, and like you said, it's just tons of stuff you never even thought of. But I mean, some kind of unusual ingredients that, you know, most people might have to purchase, things that you weren't using prior to getting on the ketogenic diet. But most of the stuff is pretty easy to find at your local grocery store. And so you said for a child, like anything that basically I would eat in my ketogenic diet would be completely acceptable for a child. What about women? Women, same thing, kind of like anything a male, is eating. Women could eat a female could eat the exact same diet and be completely okay.
Yeah, I say the same thing. You know, my wife's kind of picky and kind of gravitates towards more like comfort foods, sweet foods. But there are companies like Keto Cookie is out there, and there's like a ketogenic brownie that I recently tested and things like that, and a number of recipes out there. I was making ketogenic pancakes for my wife, and she really enjoyed them. So,
and how do you make that?
If you are... What's that?
What do you put in your ketogenic pancakes?
Well, you can make it basically like the normal pancake recipe, but I was using a product called Keto Cuisine, which is a high oleic sunflower oil, and then I would add MCT-based powder to that, and it would come out kind of like, almost like a normal pancake, a little bit more heavy. And my wife, coming from Europe, thinks it's really strange to put sugary syrup on pancakes, so she puts things like cream cheese on pancake or sour cream. So that would be, it's actually, would calculate the macros, and it was like a perfect ketogenic ratio. It was like a 4.1 or 3.1 ratio, the way I made it, at 3.1, I think, which I'm speaking from clinical perspectives. And she loved it, and she enjoyed it. So I was on a kick eating that for a while. But I am kind of a big believer in whole foods, or a fan of it, I should say, and just tend to stick with, my traditional eggs and maybe some kind of green for breakfast, and always have a salad and some kind of vegetables, usually cooked in olive oil or butter at nighttime.
What do you think of like the Walden Farms type of sugar-free products like that?
Yeah, I've bought them before and I've used them. I think they're great. I generally like the idea of weaning your palate off of super sweet things. I think it may be sending an artificial signal to the brain. And I generally have cut back way on sweet things. And I think some of the ketogenic dessert type foods that are out there, snacks, are way too sweet for me. So they're kind of they are a treat when you eat them, but at the same time, it's like I don't need to have that sweet blast on my palate. So
yeah, I feel like it's
I do use stevia though. I have a little bit of stevia that I use occasionally, like a drop or two in my coffee or something like that, just to take the bitter edge off of it.
Yeah, because I feel like having something really sweet, even if it's not sugar, if it's just a snack and they use some type of a sweet alternative, you're still kind of getting that craving for something sweet after, right? You're still getting used to it. Yeah. So I feel like it can be counterproductive, and it can, in the short term can be helpful or a better alternative than eating something that's actually a dessert. But in a long run, I mean, you might end up getting more cravings for something sweet because of it. So yeah, it's interesting, but thank you so much, Dominic. I really appreciate your time. I know I've taken a whole bunch of your time, and you're a very busy man, and I can't thank you enough. This is so much information, and we hit on so many of the things that I want to talk about, and you really got deep into the details and articulated it in a way that I definitely couldn't. And I'm a huge fan of what you're doing, because I think that there's so many health issues that this diet could help with. I mean, even if it's just simple, just helping people's wellness in regards to dealing with joint pain, like myself. I mean, I sometimes had so much pain that I had to ice my knees after basketball, take ibuprofen before basketball, and still wake up the next day with knee pain. And cutting out sugars and carbs out of my diet almost completely eliminated that. So it's I think it can be very beneficial to a lot of people. And, and I think that we're only scratching the surface on what its benefits really are. So thank God there's people like yourself who are spending, their lives researching this.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a fun area of research to be in. I feel very fortunate to have the opportunity to do kind of research in the area of nutrition, which is really a passion of mine. And yeah, just thanks for giving me the platform to speak about my research. And I always try to encourage other people, research scientists, to get out there and promote their research, because it's important, and I'm just glad that you're interested in this topic and gave me the platform to talk about it. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I think that diet's such an important topic. I've had comedians on, musicians and historians also.
Yeah,
but but the thing is, a diet, like the nice thing is, I hope that somebody who maybe listens to this show because they like history or they like whatever, maybe we expose them to a line of research they might not actually look into themselves if it wasn't for the show. So that's kind of like the goal of the show, is just kind of bring some interesting topics to people that might not actually be looking for it and might just be regular listeners who like, oh, let me give this a try. But I think diet's so important because it affects us all. You know, like we can read about history, we can read about all this stuff, but diet affects people today, and it can help with your energy levels, with dealing with everyday tasks. It can help with your medical bills. It can, you know, I just feel like it has such a effect on our moods. You know, it has effect on our, like I said, inflammation, energy, cognitive function. All these things can be improved and can be helped if we just have a better understanding of what we should be eating and how to increase, you know, mental performance and physical performance. And I think for a long time we've been sold, you know, a lot of things have been demonized, and we've been sold a bunch of lies. And like one of my favorite quotes, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. I feel like we've been tricked with what we should be eating, and now it's much harder to convince them that you know, it's okay to eat fats and you know, really sugar and carbs are really the thing that maybe we should be putting more attention on. So thanks a lot, Dominic. I really appreciate your time. I'll send you all the links to the show once it's up and live, and feel free to share it and tweet it or do whatever you can. And I'm just glad that I can be a part of you know, putting this information out there. And do you have a website or anything that you want to send people to or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Probably the best website would be ketonutrition.org is my website. I just compile a lot of resources on there, previous podcasts, and I have registered dietitians and consultants on there because you know, I get a lot of people asking me to help them out, but there's a lot of consultants that are actually certified to do that on there. And yeah, like you were saying, I think nutrition is probably the number one tool for improving your overall quality of life. And I think that's really important. And I'm really thankful that you're promoting this on your show, and you had me on. Thanks again for that.
Hey, thanks, Dominic. Well, enjoy the rest of your 4th of July week, and hopefully I didn't take up too much of your time. And hopefully between all this working, you have some time to hang out and enjoy the weather and you know, enjoy yourself. Yeah. Great. Hey, thanks, Dominic. Take care. Have a great night, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
I would like that. Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.